Maria Reyes had owned her home for exactly 3 weeks when the trouble began. She stepped outside one morning to find an orange cone blocking half her driveway. A laminated note was taped to her garage door, written in furious capital letters. It read that she was trespassing on Diane Whitfield's exclusive HOA-approved parking easement. Maria's stomach tightened as she remembered the closing papers she had signed last month. Nothing in those documents mentioned any shared easement or special parking restriction whatsoever. She glanced across the street and saw Diane watching from her porch, arms crossed. Diane was the HOA president, infamous throughout Maple Hollow for her iron-fisted rules. Neighbors whispered that Diane treated the community like her personal kingdom of control. Maria swallowed her fear and walked across the street to ask a simple question. "Excuse me?" she asked as politely as possible. Diane smiled coldly and said the previous owners had always respected the property line. "Half that driveway has belonged to my family's easement for over 15 years now," she snapped. Maria's hands trembled slightly, but she forced herself to remain calm and respectful. "I have my deed and survey documents." "And they don't mention any easement," Maria replied. Diane scoffed and waved a thick folder of HOA violation forms in her face. "The HOA bylaws override outdated paperwork." "Sweetheart. Around here," she said. Maria's chest tightened with a mixture of confusion, anger. She had moved her family here for safety, not for daily harassment from a stranger. Her husband Carlos, a disabled veteran, watched from their porch with growing concern. He had survived 2 deployments overseas, only to face a new battle on his own street. Carlos rolled his wheelchair down the ramp, determined to support his wife immediately. "Ma'am." "Everything was clear at closing," he said firmly. Diane barely glanced at him, dismissing his words with an impatient flick of her wrist. "HOA rules apply to everyone, veteran or not. No special treatment," she said coldly. Maria felt her face flush with humiliation as other neighbors began stepping outside to watch. A kind elderly neighbor named Mr. Thompson shook his head slowly in obvious disapproval. He had lived on this street for 20 years and remembered Diane's previous schemes well. "She tried this with the Pattersons too. Until they finally proved her completely wrong," he murmured. That single sentence sparked a tiny flicker of hope inside Maria's exhausted heart. Maybe she wasn't the only family Diane had targeted with these aggressive false claims. Diane snapped another photo of the driveway, adding it to her growing violation file. "You have 72 hours to move your vehicle, or we will tow it," she warned. Maria's voice cracked slightly as she asked what authority gave her that legal power. Diane simply smiled and said HOA presidents had broader authority than most people realized. Carlos clenched his fists, fighting the urge to argue further in front of his children. Their 2 kids watched nervously from the window, sensing the tension building outside. Maria took a deep breath and forced herself to think clearly instead of emotionally. She remembered something important from her closing paperwork tucked safely inside a manila folder. There had been an official county survey completed just weeks before they moved in. That survey clearly marked every boundary line, easement, ice measurements. If Diane's claim was false, that survey could become powerful and undeniable evidence. Maria turned back toward her house, her mind racing with sudden cautious determination. She would not let intimidation tactics push her family out of their first real home. Carlos squeezed her hand gently. silently promising they would face this fight together. As they walked inside, Diane called out one final threatening warning behind them. "This isn't over. Reyes. What it wants eventually," she said. Maria closed the door and leaned against it, her heart pounding with anger and resolve. She pulled out her laptop and began searching for the original survey documents immediately. Somewhere in those carefully measured lines lay the truth Diane desperately wanted to hide. That night, document across their small kitchen table carefully. Carlos sat beside her, scanning pages with the same discipline he once used in combat. Their daughter peeked around the corner, asking quietly if everything was going to be okay. Maria forced a reassuring smile, though uncertainty still churned heavily inside her chest. She finally found the county surveyor's report buried beneath insurance papers and mortgage statements. The official document clearly outlined every boundary marker using exact legal measurements and coordinates. Nothing in the report mentioned any shared easement benefiting the Whitfield property whatsoever. Carlos exhaled sharply, relief and anger mixing together in his tired veteran's eyes. "She's lying," he whispered, his voice trembling between disbelief and quiet simmering fury. Maria nodded slowly, memories of Diane's smug expression replaying painfully in her mind. The next morning, to request an official verification. A patient clerk confirmed the survey was accurate. Recorded. Question. Maria felt a surge of validation. But she knew Diane wouldn't surrender easily at all. Sure enough, taped to their mailbox before breakfast even ended. This one threatened fines escalating daily until the vehicle was removed from the driveway. Maria's hands shook as she photographed the notice for her growing folder of evidence. She began documenting everything. Every note, every confrontation with careful precision. Mr. That afternoon, holding an old manila folder. "I kept records from when Diane tried this with the Pattersons years ago," he explained. Inside were emails, photos, proving Diane's previous claim false. Maria's eyes widened as she realized this had happened before under eerily similar circumstances. Diane had a documented pattern of targeting new homeowners with fabricated easement claims. Anger flared inside Maria, but she channeled it into focused, determined preparation instead. She contacted a local attorney who specialized in HOA disputes and property law conflicts. The attorney reviewed her documents and confirmed the survey alone could dismantle Diane's entire claim. "This isn't just wrong. It's borderline harassment. And we can prove it," the attorney said firmly. Maria felt something shift inside her. Fear slowly transforming into unstoppable righteous determination. Carlos began researching HOA bylaws late into the night, searching for additional violations Diane committed. He discovered Diane had skipped mandatory board votes when issuing personal violation notices before. Every new piece of evidence strengthened their case against her abusive unchecked authority. Meanwhile, sending a formal letter threatening to tow their vehicle immediately. She also mailed copies to several neighbors, hoping to publicly shame the Reyes family. Instead, that Diane never anticipated within her calculated plan. Neighbors began reaching out quietly, sharing their own stories of Diane's unfair treatment. A young immigrant family described being fined for flying their home country's flag once. An elderly widow recalled being threatened over flower beds that violated no actual rule. Maria realized she wasn't fighting just for her driveway, but for the entire neighborhood's dignity. She organized a small meeting at her home, inviting affected neighbors to share evidence together. One by one. There's photographs. The kitchen table that once held only her own documents now overflowed with testimonies. Carlos stood at the head of the table, his presence calm but unmistakably commanding. "We're requesting an emergency HOA board meeting to address Diane's pattern of abuse," he announced. Murmurs of agreement spread through the room, fueled by years of quiet suffering finally surfacing. Maria felt tears prick her eyes. Not from fear anymore, but from fierce solidarity. For the first time since moving in, she felt truly supported by her community. The attorney helped them draft a formal complaint backed by the county survey results. They scheduled the emergency meeting for the following week inside the community clubhouse. Diane, against her, continued issuing threats without hesitation. She left one final voicemail, warning Maria that the board always sided with her. Maria saved the voicemail, knowing it would become powerful evidence during the meeting. As the day approached, nervous energy mixed with quiet, unstoppable determination inside their home. Carlos squeezed Maria's hand and promised this fight would finally end in their favor. Neither of them realized just how dramatically that meeting would expose Diane's true nature. The community clubhouse buzzed with tension as residents filled every available seat that evening. Diane sat confidently at the head table, unaware of the documents prepared against her. Maria stood, flutter still lingering in her chest. She presented the official county survey, projecting it clearly onto the large meeting screen. Gasps rippled through the room as the precise boundary lines silenced any lingering doubt. "This survey proves conclusively that no easement exists on my property whatsoever," Maria stated firmly. Diane's confident smile faltered slightly as murmurs of disbelief spread across the room. Carlos wheeled forward, presenting documented bylaw violations Diane had repeatedly ignored over the years. He calmly listed missed votes, fabricated notices, and selectively enforced rules favoring her allies. Mr. Sharing the Pattersons' old case file from years earlier. The widow described her unjust flower bed fine, her voice trembling with long-suppressed anger. The immigrant family shared their flag incident, revealing a troubling pattern of targeted discrimination. One testimony after another painted a damning picture of unchecked, abusive HOA authority. Diane's face turned pale as the board members exchanged uncomfortable, disapproving glances. "This is outrageous. These are isolated incidents taken completely out of context," Diane stammered defensively. The attorney calmly presented the voicemail recording, Diane's threatening words filling the silent room. Her own voice condemned her more effectively than any testimony could. The HOA board president cleared his throat, visibly shaken by the overwhelming evidence presented. "Diane, both county law and our community's official code of conduct," he said. Diane's hands trembled as she realized her carefully built authority was collapsing rapidly. A formal vote was called immediately, board members raising hands to remove her position. The motion passed unanimously, stripping Diane of her HOA presidency on the spot. Gasps turned into stunned silence, then quiet. The crowded room. Diane stood abruptly. Her face flushed with humiliation and disbelief at the sudden downfall. "You'll all regret this. This neighborhood needs strong leadership," she said. Voice cracking with desperation. No one responded. The silence itself delivering a powerful, unmistakable rejection of her words. She gathered her folder with shaking hands and walked stiffly out of the clubhouse doors. Maria watched her leave, feeling not triumph, but a heavy wave of long-awaited relief. Carlos reached for her hand, his eyes shining with quiet, proud admiration. The new interim HOA leadership immediately issued a formal apology to the Reyes family. They also announced a full review of every violation Diane had issued during her tenure. Within weeks, records corrected, and harassment policies completely overhauled community-wide. Maria's driveway sat untouched. The orange cone long gone, replaced by ordinary peaceful mornings. Neighbors who once feared speaking out now greeted her warmly with genuine respect. The immigrant family proudly displayed their flag without fear of retaliation for the first time. The elderly widow replanted her flowers, finally free from arbitrary, unjust restrictions. Carlos often sat on their porch, watching their children play safely in the driveway. He felt a quiet pride knowing his family had fought injustice and emerged victorious together. Maria framed the original county survey, hanging it proudly inside their living room wall. It served as a daily reminder that truth and evidence could defeat unchecked abusive power. Diane eventually moved away, her reputation forever tarnished throughout the entire community she once ruled. Mr. had finally caught up with her relentless cruelty. Maria smiled whenever she heard those words, grateful for the courage that sparked real change. Their story spread quietly through neighboring communities, inspiring others to question unfair HOA practices. Families facing similar harassment found strength in Maria and Carlos's determined, peaceful resistance. Justice didn't always arrive quickly, but it arrived when truth was defended. Standing firm against intimidation had transformed fear into lasting community-wide empowerment and dignity. In the end, in concrete, it became a symbol of justice. A symbol proving that even ordinary families could stand against abuse and ultimately triumph.